I'm Tommy, and today I'm going to be showing you a trick to turn old boring samples into something a lot more interesting, useful, and glitchy. So the first thing that you want to do is get your samples. And I started doing this by taking old Serum patches that I had made that just weren't good. They didn't fit a sound I was going for, they weren't really useful, maybe they didn't have enough movement in them. I just didn't like them and I knew that they weren't going to be used. And so what I would do, because it was typically basses or chord sounds that I would really mess up, what I would do is print it out to audio, like a couple bars or a bar and a half of them, and I would do what I'm about to show you guys, which is duplicate these samples, put different kinds of effects and sort of alterations on them, then print all of that back to audio, chop it up, and rearrange it. The first step, like I said, is just getting your samples, and that's really pretty easy. I'm sure everybody has some really garbage synth patches sitting around, or maybe a sample pack you downloaded that you just really don't like. And these don't just have to be, these big FM basses or growls or neuros or super saw or something. You can do this with drum loops, you can do this with acapellas. And really, the sky's the limit with this. Pick whatever samples you want to work with, and another interesting thing that you can do is look at the last video that I put out about adding texture to your drums, and you can do that with this too. You can really do it with anything, but if you gate a very consistent texture or sort of ambient sound over something that's as sporadic and I guess chaotic as what we're going to be making, it can give it this sense of unity and cohesion that can be extraordinarily useful for making it fit not just into a mix in a technical sense, but also in a more artistic sense. I've got 3 copies of these now, and I'm going to go ahead and make some modifications and explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. So one of the quickest ways to make a new sample out of one with a lot of movement, so let's listen to this original kind of neuro line. There's definitely a lot of notch filtering going on there. There's a lot of that classic Reese sound getting kind of twisted and bent. And with all of this movement, let's go ahead and reverse it. Reversing something as static as one of these chords or FM basses up here isn't really going to do a ton. So here, now I bet this is going to sound like the sample's probably just longer. Yeah, so really unnatural sounds, we tend not to have too much of a concept of which direction they go. Everybody can hear a reversed crash cymbal and think, oh yeah, that doesn't really sound physically possible. But this whole sound isn't physically possible. And so by reversing it, I feel like you can really just kind of add length on, you can kind of just cheat more length onto a sample as artificial as this. Something else that I forgot to mention here is to make sure that you can place individual effects on each of these samples, on each of the duplicates of each of your samples. What you want to be able to do is, so we have the original neuro, and then we have, I'll go ahead and rename these. And, what we're going to do is instead of just reversing it, we're also going to distort it. So let's go ahead and set a loop up, open up the mixer channel, and oh man, so many choices. I'm gonna go for a free bit crusher called Crush. Excellent. So that definitely sounds a lot different in character, but it's still, maintaining the kind of strength and power that you tend to get out of those really heavy, Reese-based derivatives. And now we have a third version of this. And since it's already a pretty deep sound, I'm curious to see what'll happen. Okay, making sure just that's selected. If we put on a Little Alter Boy, which is a Sound Toys plugin that's both a pitch and a formant shifter. Excellent. And this is one that I think would benefit from upping the stereo with. I believe in Ableton you have to use the utility plugin to do this, but in FL you can just use this knob right here for stereo separation. Oh, absolutely. Honestly, I'm probably going to do that to all 3 of these neuro channels. Labeling things is just good for creativity and just for managing everything, you know? Also, let's go ahead and make the bit crushed reversed neuro. Yeah, let's EQ this to have a little bit of a better character. I want it to be more bright, more high end in there. So I'm just going to throw a high shelf on here with a very, very smooth curve. And then turn that down just to adjust the volume. All right. Excellent. So we have done those first 3. Okay, so this is a really smooth but still very full spectrum sound. Reversing it probably wouldn't do a lot. I guess let's give that a quick listen. Sounds identical. So let's go ahead and darken it with some EQ and then regain that high end through saturation. So I'm going to high shelf it down. Leave just the bass and a little bit of that body right here. And now I'll come in here and I'll use Saturn so that we can really target like individual bands with just enough distortion. Saturn's another FabFilter plugin just like Pro Q2 that's very helpful. Okay, so I can see the separation point there. Let's put this here. So this is the one that I care the most about. Yeah, oftentimes if you saturate really low end, like bass or sub-bass content too much, then that specific band or whatever it is that you're saturating will gain so much high-end content that the low-end kind of gets overwhelmed. And it can end up taking a lot of the body out of a sound. Perfect. Alright, now that we've kind of brute force remade a lot of those overtones, I'm going to go back in and then re-brighten it after the distortion. So many high shelf EQs, I'm telling you. Awesome. Those really have different character. And now let's look at the third one. And there are a lot of things we could do with it. As you can tell, I haven't planned this. I'm just improvising as I go. Let's just drown this in a reverb. Like 100% mix reverb. With a lot of decay, no high cut, I don't know, 100% depth kind of phases. Let's put it about here. Let's just listen back through our 3 chord samples. We have the original. We have the sample where we pretty brutally EQ'd out most of the high-end content. We didn't get rid of it, we just darkened it a lot. And then we saturated and reboosted that new saturated content. And then we have this one. Which is covered in 2 copies of that Valhalla Room reverb that I just very haphazardly threw together. And so we've altered our chord samples, we've altered our neuro samples. Now let's work on this extraordinarily compressed, I think it's actually just due to the distortion, but it is pretty much an FM bass. Oh man. Okay, that's a little bit better. So we've got the original there. This is gonna be a hard one to work with. So I tend to have beef with working with sounds that are this distorted. It's good to have overtones. It's good to have harmonic content. But working with things that's distorted can just be like a special kind of hassle. Let's see, I just opened a filter plugin I barely use. Let's see how it goes. This is the Arturia. It's like a model of an M12. That was a smart move. Something I'm going to do real quick, because I think a lot of these plugins are working rhythmically to the song's BPM. I'm going to stretch all of these samples out to make them a full bar long. Let's see how that filter hits it now. Okay, cool. And so now we've just got a third variant, and that is... Here, actually, 1 minute. I want to do something else to this. On that second FM bass, this is something that's really worthwhile to get into the habit of doing if you find yourself doing this often, is to EQ little tonal differences into your variants. I feel like that's getting it to distort in just the right places, you know, it's clipping just right. Yeah. I feel like that's the audio engineer's version of, you know, eating a pepper and it burns so good. Okay, so the final FM bass. Okay, so I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to do to this one. I'm going to notch out really big, broad sections. So... I don't know, let's do this. I'm actually, okay, yeah, so I'm going to reverse this. The reason for that is that it's a lot easier to add overtones than it is to add undertones. Perfect. Okay, so it's extraordinarily difficult to distort something in a way that you get interesting undertones, but interesting overtones, that's just distortion. You know, that's just saturation. That's just all of these things that we use constantly when we mix or when we do sound design. Something that I think producers should always do is have a bunch of distortion plugins just sitting around. You know, you can definitely see the distortion section when I open the effects. Actually, I know what Devastator is. I know I probably shouldn't be using that for this. Oh, where's Decapitator? Yeah, get to know the character of these things. A lot of people like to talk about digital plugins as if they don't really have a character except for, you know, like Neve channel strip emulations or something. But that's really not true. I mean, everything does. Everything's written a little bit different. I feel like EQs are actually really similar when it comes to digital things. A couple are kind of special. But distortions are always very unique with the exception of soft clippers. Those... we have enough of them, you know? Okay. We just made it sound worse. That's all we did. That's horrible. Vocals. Huh. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. Perfect. Okay, and so now we have all of the affected versions of our samples. Let's keep this loop running, and I'll hop around and solo each one. And always remember to save every time you get anything done you wouldn't want to lose. And now comes the exciting, the slightly more difficult part. That is cutting these all up and rearranging them. And typically what I do at first, at least in FL, is I set it to quarter beat, and I'll run around and do every other, but that's really just an old habit. It's a little bit easier to throw it in half, and then if you need anything smaller, what you can do is just subdivide like as you're actually arranging the new loop. And I also like working from more broad strokes because it lets you get more of an idea of, what should the big picture of this sound like in terms of how does the pitch move, how does the timbre move, how well can I keep the dynamics going here, things like that. Yeah, that's something that I learned doing this a lot on tracks that ended up not getting released because I was still learning how to do this. But it was that you don't just have to worry about how the pitch moves to kind of get all these little micro sample chops to become a melody. One of the biggest things that you have to worry about is how the timbre moves. It has to be ear catching, but not so chaotic that nobody can listen to it. And it's a balance you find through practice mostly. Also, I like to really pull everything like out of place. So let's just throw some random pieces down here in track 11. We'll get working with this one. So I think I want a full, oh Jesus, I have stretch on. Okay, I think I want a full beat of that reverbed chord up here, and then I'll probably hold it to more distorted ones. And then let's stutter one of these neuro cuts. Okay, let's see how this sounds. That's kind of alright, I guess. I definitely think it would be cool to, let's see, throw this reverb one on the end, and then we can alternate the distorted and the original clean. Like this. Yeah, the pre-delay on that reverb really isn't helping. Oh yeah, it's on both of them too. I probably should have cut it in half. So this is already an example of, you can kind of hear a rhythm in this. And, you could play with it, loop it, alter it. And what I've learned is that this is kind of its own unique form of composition. Like I said, you can find movements in pitch, you can find movements in timbre and in transients, and that's the next thing that I want to talk about actually, is how do you treat this once it's done? What I'm going to be showing you now is a creative mixing tip as it pertains to, let's see, pull a channel over the bus, as it pertains to making sure that your transients and your stereo width have the alteration that you want them to. You want these things to be up and down and moving in different ways. It's part of why things like neuro basses can be so catching to the ear. It's a sound that you'll never really hear without hearing, something that's specifically engineered to be a neuro bass. So the way that I do this, at least in FL Studio, but I'm sure that it works the same in really any other DAW, is I give myself the leverage to move these sounds in specific ways. So let's go ahead and see how this will affect the sound of stereo separation. Okay. And we can also pan it from here. I'm a lot more interested in the stereo separation though. So let's go ahead and throw down an automation envelope for that. And always end these in a fruity send so that you can automate the volume. And really this is all that you need to be able to play with the stereo width and the separation. Something else that I'm going to throw in here though is another brightness EQ. I know it must seem like I just have hearing damage at this point, but every little alteration in tone that you can give yourself is going to be helpful for you in making this unique and in giving this movement. All right. So something else that's helpful for this is, I know it takes a second, I know it's pretty annoying, but go ahead and grab whatever level you're starting at and run around and set flat points there and then paste in the value. So, you know, just right clicking at the point where each of these samples break up and then right clicking again, hitting P. It's kind of like the shortcut for it. Man, this really sucks with small cuts. And the reason that we're doing this is so that we can go back and, you know, say, well, I want it to peak on this sample and this one and the end of this one. And we can do that just by playing with the weights of these and, you know, by throwing things in the middle. And then we don't really have to worry about, oh, you know, well, I left it too high or too low for the next ones, and it's, you know, it's going to affect how all of this comes through. And what happens is you just won't find yourself running through, like, debugging it as much, you know. You'll have a deeper and much easier understanding of why it's working the way that it does. Okay, so I've got all of the points put in. I also just, while I was doing all of that manually, I realized that if you go into the automation envelope menu in FL, you go to the drop-down little settings thing here, articulator, you can just copy the state of the first one, and then, you know, run into the others, drop-down articulator, and after you've copied a state, you can paste it. So, yeah, don't waste your time like I did. So let's go ahead and start automating stereo separation. So the places to me that it feels a little bit too mono would be these two neuro hits right here. So let's move that up and up. And you definitely don't have to be precise. In fact, being imprecise is probably to your benefit here. And let's see, distorted, normal. I want to throw this on the normal ones. Oh wow, it really oh man, yeah, my CPU really doesn't like that. Okay. So now I'm going to use the articulator state copy. I'm going to duplicate this over for the volumes too. And then right here, I'm going to get rid of some of these divisions and just make this slope up. I feel like all that's really done is make it a little bit more level though. Man. Alright, and now I'm going to have the brightness kind of like wildly oscillating throughout this. Another good sort of power user tip for FL as it relates to doing this is to use different LFO shapes. You know, so maybe have like smooth stairs going up for a section of this. So that would actually be really interesting. What I'm going to do is get rid of some of these to give myself enough space for it to, you know, be kind of noticeable that I'm moving the brightness in this way. And then let's go ahead and set this to... not as interesting as I thought it was. Let's just do normal stairs. Okay, that's kind of cool. Yeah, so you can definitely hear how much life is given to it by automating it like that. And now all that's really left for me to talk about is the more technical side of the mix, which is taking this from sounding like some unmixed chaos and kind of gluing it all together. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done a little bit more mixing on this bus. I organized the mixer a little bit more. Just to show you what's been changed, I have panned some things. Some of these FM basses now are panned, and 2 of the chord samples. I took one of the reverbs that we had on the reverb chord off, just because it was hanging around for so long. Stacking reverbs is more of an ambient trick than for when you want things really tight, like I'm aiming for here. And I also went in and I changed the weights of a lot of these points, which means this curve right here. And I just made the volume automation much more like steep and intense, just so that we can get slightly more dramatic, like Mr. Bill type transients here. And that's also part of what I went for in the bus. So as I'm flipping this, you'll be able to hear it with the effects off, and then back on. And I think it sounds a lot better. You might not, but what I'm trying to do here is accentuate essentially the sub bass and then the higher end of the highs. And I want those to stick out with a kind of scoop on the EQ. I'm also using a Pro C2 preset called EDM Punch 1 that has always served me fantastically. And yeah, of course, some multi-band expansion, just where it counts, and then compression in other places. And then I'm just keeping the volumes adjusted here with Trimmer and Revival. Or excuse me, Revival is like an EQ harmonic exciter type of deal, but Trimmer is keeping the volumes level from no effects to having effects. So yeah, something that's really important for this, like I've been saying, is building up your own little suite of plugins. They definitely don't have to be paid ones. Free plugins are often about the same quality, I've come to find over time. And a lot of them are really unique. I should make a video on that soon. A lot of people have, but yeah, I hope you've been able to learn something from this. As always, I hope that this will help you in making music of your own. And feel free to leave any questions in the comments. Have a good day.